Hello and welcome to the Mid-Table and Up podcast. We've got a very special guest joining us on the podcast today. We're going to be discussing Great Escapes. So we've got the author of The Greatest Escape, West Ham's craziest season. It's Daniel Hurley. Hi, how are you, Daniel? You okay?
Well, good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. And of course, also joining us is our not so special guest. It's Matthew Lee and our resident tractor boy, Simon Bartlett. You all right, guys?
Yeah, good mate. Thanks. Thanks
Good.
for the not so special.
Oh, you're more than welcome. It wouldn't be an intro if I didn't have to roast you guys somewhat in the process. As always, please do check out our social media and follow us on your streaming platform as well. Before we, I reckon it's just now time to crack on with the talk of the Greatest Escape. So first of all, Daniel, how West Ham? How did you come to support the club to begin with?
I wasn't really given a choice. It's a family thing.
Most West Ham fans.
No one is, are they?
Yeah.
Really?
If I'd been given a choice, I think I might have made a different one, to be fair. There's a few to pick from in London. But no, my dad's a lifelong fan. He's been going since like the late 60s, and then started dragging me along in sort of early 90s and hated it initially, but then grew to love it. And sort of went from there. But I've been a fan for pretty much my whole life and going to the games since about 92. So, a while of pain and suffering.
Oh, man, yeah, not bad. Yeah, I know. It's one of those things, though, where this season is so odd. I almost feel like I'm being lulled into a sort of false sense of security. I'm not used to us doing well.
I couldn't agree more. Like, I'm still waiting and convinced at the moment it's going to go wrong. Like, even down to if we somehow come fourth, someone's going to win the Champions League and knock us out of the position.
Yeah.
I've made my peace with it.
It's the West Ham way.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's so odd. I almost feel like we've been in danger of being relegated for so often now. To not have a season like that, it almost makes me feel a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's for me. Is almost when you got Tottenham playing Crystal Palace. It's the weirdness of wanting Crystal Palace to win. Like rather than wanting the teams at the top to lose is very different than wanting the teams at the bottom to lose.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what was it? I think Leicester dropped points midweek as well. Man United drew to Crystal Palace, and I'm rubbing my hands, going, they're faltering here, and then I'm thinking, what is going on? It's so it's so unfamiliar territory as a West Ham fan right now, but more than a welcome one. I think we've been through enough pain, for a lifetime really. So hopefully, long may this kind of run of form continue and way into the next season. But so what was kind of like your main inspiration behind writing The Great Escape? Obviously, other than the season itself, did you always want to write a book about West Ham?
From when I was a young child, really, I'd always kind of loved the idea of writing a book. And then, like a lot of people in the country and the world, I was furloughed last March and kind of thought, well, if I was ever going to do it, I actually had the time to do it. I'd worked full time after leaving university. I'd never really had that length of time off. And the idea for the book came about from walking one day with my two boys, Jack and Adam. And Adam liked the idea of kind of being told football stories at that point. So like I'd kind of run out of fake ones. So I thought I'd try and think of some real ones. And for some reason that year came up. And I've always had quite a good memory for just remembering fixtures, where I was during games, etc. So while I was telling them the story of that season, I realised kind of how mad it was and how many natural like punchlines there were. Like you have to win 3-2 up against your biggest rivals with 2 minutes to go, lose 4-3. Absolute can't lose game at a relegation rival, 3-0 down in 20 minutes, that sort of thing. And I got And I got home and I thought, if someone's wrote a book about that, I'd love to buy a book about it. And looked, and no one had. Obviously, everyone just writes stuff about the Tevez situation, and there's articles upon articles about that. But there was a lot more that happened. So the idea was sort of sown then. And as I say, once furlough came, I thought, well, it's now or never, really. And here we are.
Well, no, I think it's a brilliant book. I really, really enjoyed it. And as I said, sort of being, because where I was about 10 years old in the 2006/7 season, I remember it quite well. I remember being excited about Tevez and being having had a season ticket, like the 3 years prior, that first year back in the Premier League was a very good one for us. And obviously getting to the cup final, I was there that day. And then to kind of go from that to watching us lose almost on a weekly basis for the majority of that season, it really took a kicking. But being kind of like 10 years old, I can't really remember where I were, like over certain fixtures and things. Whereas, you being a little bit older, you've got that thing of going, oh yeah, we signed Nigel Quasi, and then Quasi, however you pronounce it, and then a week later I'm bumping into him in Tiger Portsmouth, which that was just brilliant.
Yeah, that was a good experience. I'll leave that there. But
it's as I said, it's those little bits of personality and your own story injected into the book that give it life. Because if you just wanted the bare sort of facts, anyone could just Wikipedia that season, and they've got all the scores there and the people that scored the goals. But you not only get obviously the build up around each and every game and how the expectations from the start of the season, were so high, having done so well the season before, having got to the FA Cup final, brought in two really promising World Cup stars that at that point, nobody would have really batted an eye had they signed for a Real Madrid or someone like that.
No, absolutely.
And then for them to have come to West Ham, and then over the course of a couple of months or so, our expectations of the season's dropped from, we might do some, we might get Europe or something here, to fuck, we just need to stay in the league, to holy shit, we're not even going to stay in the league.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed that. I really did.
And so as I say, I think what I really liked about it is, like I said, I wasn't living in the country at the time, so what I really got from the book was such a personal perspective on it, and I think often with football fans we could be very, I don't want to say insular, but it's sometimes hard to break into and really get in like your teeth into stories and stuff like that. If someone had really never really followed football and they had to read one football book, it would probably be this one, because
thank you very much.
It is so, it's easy to read, and it's not just about the glory of it, it's also just about the personal touch, where you were, how you found it.
I think it's that fact of portraying like football fandom generally.
Exactly.
It's difficult to explain to someone who's not in the bubble of football, and that's a really hard thing to pinpoint. When someone's like, why do you love football? It's like, well, it's kind of hard to explain, but that is kind of a good thing to sell to a neutral, I think.
Yeah.
And that was what I wanted to try and get across, really, because I do think, to an extent, I think we're all guilty as football fans of thinking that the club we support, only bad things ever happen to that one.
Yeah, of course.
I think, I've got a lot of friends who support various other clubs, and kind of even, team fans of like sort of quote unquote top clubs like your Arsenals and what have you. They still go through these kind of trials and tribulations, and that was kind of where I wanted to sort of place the book at. Like, I still think there aren't many clubs though that could come ninth, sign two world-class players, and then not score a goal for 3 months. But
it's so West Ham.
The banter era.
Yeah, like I genuinely thought the day that we signed the two of them, we might win the league. It turns out it looked like we might win the championship the following year.
Well, it was such an odd one, and again, because being like so young at the time, as I said, I remember being excited when we signed those players, but like 10 years old, you're not really aware of how football behind the scenes works, or you can just kind of go, oh, they're a very good player, and that's really it. You don't really understand the ins and outs of the transfer process, especially something like third party ownership, which at the time was obviously like a brand new thing, and obviously a no-go area. And I love the inclusion of the pre-match and post-match interviews in the book, because it offers a real insight into like not only the manager but almost the club's mentality at the time, and a real big throwback to sort of say like noughties football in general. But when you've got Alan Pardew having, on the day we've signed Tevez and Mascherano saying, oh, well, they've got 4-year contracts, but we're hoping they're going to be here still in 2 years' time. Maybe, at least another year at the very... And when you read that, you kind of go, like, Jesus, like, well, what has gone on?
Yeah. Like, that's the thing, I think, which I found really interesting when I was researching it. So you have to remember, obviously, this was pre-social media. Although I think a lot of us will feel that era is sort of modern in terms of the social media era, it's really not.
No.
Twitter became a thing maybe a year, 2 years later. So you still kind of were getting the vast majority of your information still from the normal press.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the normal press, no one kind of queried how we'd managed to sign these players. So, which really should have been queried. I mean, our top transfer fee at the time was like 7 million. Tevez was being linked for go to clubs for like 30 million, and no one queried it. I think nowadays, you'd have a lot more scrutiny over it initially than ever came up then. And I found it really interesting how we were almost admitting it in public, but we didn't properly own them, and still no one was talking about it.
Yeah,
I mean, in fairness,
so
like,
weird.
I don't.
Oh, go on, Simon.
Sorry, I can't remember another transfer involving third parties kind of since that. Certainly not to that level. Obviously, I know Tevez went to United and kind of on loan from third parties again, but it's gone out of the game. I think it's kind of just been shut down generally after certainly in the Premier League.
I think the most you have now is maybe like the Wolves model, where like an agent is really strongly involved. Yeah. Not saying there's any improprieties in what Wolves are doing, there's clearly not, but where an agent is heavily involved in transfers, and it's kind of a slightly more kind of nuanced way of doing it than I think we were doing. But I think that's probably the nearest you get now. Like, I don't really think there's a lot more than that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think you raised an interesting point because, I feel like football, I don't want to say naive back then, but even recently when West Ham sold Robert Snodgrass to West Brom, in the pre-match interview, Sam Allardyce has come out and said, oh yeah, there was an agreement that, if we wanted the deal done now, we're not to play Snodgrass. And they had to investigate that. And you kind of think, in the end, obviously, there was nothing in writing. It was probably just a gentleman's agreement of, if you want him now, you can have him now to play Wolves. But
it's still
a bit dodgy, though. I think we all know that, like... if it's something that our owners are currently really good at, or have always been really good at, it's just doing stuff that's just a bit dodgy. I mean, I think just to kind of build on what we're saying, probably the reason we haven't seen too many third-party ownership sort of agreements is partly because probably the players don't want to get involved in it, because the clubs, this was probably the highest profile case of this happening. So it's one of those things where it's like, you don't want to have this happened to you.
I agree.
I
think had this gone quite smoothly, I think it would have happened a lot more, but it was such a public
humiliation.
Humiliation is a great word. I think it scared a lot of people off.
No, completely. Well, I mean, because this is the thing that really, when you talk about, say, the Great Escapes, it's one that really kind of, for me, sort of throws our one into the conversation so much more than, because it's more than just about, having been crap for like the majority of the season, then turning it around in your last 5 to 10 games or so. Because there's so many implications of, are you going to be deducted points from this? Should Tevez even really have been playing at this point? And when you kind of add that element into it, even you think of like Leicester the year before they won the league. Obviously, them doing a year later almost helps increase the how incredible that Great Escape was. But when you look at things like West Brom, bottom at Christmas, the only team to be bottom at Christmas and stay up. Again, there's not really that element of off the pitch things that could ultimately be what buries your club. And then
I think that's the thing of like safety wasn't assured until like months after, when the courts had kind of gone through it and Premier League investigated it. It wasn't a case of, we stayed up on the final day, that's it, it's done. It's still like another month of waiting while like investigations and stuff go ahead.
Yeah. And I mean, from Dan, from the time obviously you were going through that, was there a big sensation when obviously all the court hearings was going? Was there a feeling that it's not over and that we could get relegated, or once the season was kind of done and dusted, was there that feeling they're not going to take it away from us now?
I was quite relaxed. Just for, I touch on this in the book when I say why I think they didn't deduct us points, which is because I think had they deducted us points and relegated us, we'd have gone to court and dragged it out. And I think the one of the reasons that they didn't was because the Premier League couldn't risk, August coming around and knowing what league West Ham were in.
Yeah.
And I think for that reason, I always thought once the games had finished, even though Sheffield United were challenging it, I thought I couldn't see that they would relegate us because we challenged that then. And then what happens when you're releasing the fixtures in June and July and you don't know how West Ham and Sheffield United were in the league? I just think it would have been such an unprecedented thing, and like how long legal cases can go on for? They'd have had to suspend the season to like October while they worked out who the 20th club was going to be. So for that reason, I always felt relatively comfortable. Like for the month or so it was after the season had finished, they wouldn't go back on the decision.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the same time, I won't say that there wasn't a little bit of nerves there, but I was relatively confident.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, and I do think the book kind of shed good light onto this, was that realistically, that the reason why, at least the initial, because it all finally came unearthed through us trying to sell Mascherano to Liverpool then, because then it became apparent he's not our player to sell. And then by the time that they wanted to effectively punish West Ham, they were kind of hoping that we would, it would mathematically be over, that it would make no odds that we were going to be dead and buried, and they could just slap a 10-point deduction on us and go, this is a warning to any other Premier League club that does the same thing. But then you fast forward to, I think it was around the end of April, and actually by that point, our fight back, we're right in the midst of it, and they're kind of going, oh, fuck, well, if we deduct them the points now, we are relegating. So they almost sort of like backed themselves into a corner there, the Premier League.
Yeah, well, the charges were levelled after we just lost 4-0 at Charlton and were bottom and, to all intents and purposes, relegated. So I think they held it the day before Wigan away, which was the third to last game. So it was entirely reasonable that we'd have gone down. I mean, there was, I think, 9 more points to play for by the time the Wigan game had come around. We were already more than 9 points off safety when they levied the charge. So I think it was probably a calculated risk that they took, and I do think the intention was to deduct us points. I do. But then, as I say, they just put us in. We put the whole thing into a position by the fact we kept winning, which was a bit of a nuisance to them.
Yeah.
And
had one all season as well, barely.
So then it wasn't 10 points or 1 point or whatever; it was relegation, which then it comes across as a much bigger punishment. And then we'd have challenged it, and you got that whole thing. But with us playing the victim card rather than Sheffield United. Yeah,
just a very odd set of circumstances all in, really. But obviously, as I said, part of the reason why I thought the book was fantastic was because of the personal elements inside the story itself. But on top of that, there, like every game of that season there's you go over it and it's all recited, and I was kind of, and I wanted to, what was the sort of process for the research, and how did you find that? Did you enjoy doing all of that research, or did it become a bit of a slog at times?
No, not really. Kind of a lot of the source material was just literally like my other half, Kate, bought me the season DVD, which then just jogged a lot of memories. Like I said earlier, I've always had quite a good memory for remembering where I was when I either at a game or where I was watching it or whatever. So some of that just came naturally, and then a lot of it was just looking at match reports online, etc., and just jogging my memory in that way. But I say it was really just blessed that I've got a good recollection of certain games and where I was and certain things like that. And just going from there. As I say, I in terms of writing it, there were only a couple of bits I really found really difficult. One was, I think we went 8 games without a goal, and there was a little bit during that spell when I'm writing it. I'm starting to run out of things of different ways to say we didn't score again. Yeah, and then the other one, funnily, was the game when we lost 4-3 to Tottenham, where, having wrote about it, I was genuinely in quite a bad mood for a couple of days. I didn't realise how much it was going to affect me reliving it.
Yeah, I mean,
more
that game
than I
would do it.
realised.
That game would do it. That was an
Yeah.
emotional day. I remember being at the stadium when that free kick went in, and you finally felt Tevez has got his first goal, and then to go and lose the game in the manner that we did, and be like, we're probably going to get relegated. It was one of them. It all worked out in the end. But yeah, it was just kind of horrible, and I can kind of get how, looking back at that, it almost brings all those emotions back to the forefront somewhat.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that at least the process of it seems quite doable, really, quite not quite nice, as you said. It obviously helps that you've got a good recollection of where you were when certain games and that were going on.
Yeah.
Well,
It was gone to.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, and I guess also it's quite funny that you were writing the book about a relegation scrap while West Ham was in a relegation scrap last year. So
that was actually one thing, weirdly, because I was literally writing it during a lot of that. And I did kind of get to a point thinking, if we go down, I might not finish this. I'm not sure I'm going to have the stomach to finish writing a book about staying up when in real life we've just gone down. That was actually one other challenge. I remember writing it one afternoon, we were away at Newcastle, and I think we went 1-0 up, and then 2-1 up, I think, 2-2. And then I remember when Newcastle equalised, I just turned the computer off. I didn't want to write about it for the rest of the day. That sort of thing. I forgot that. But yeah, I'm not sure I'd have finished it if we'd gone down, to be fair.
No, it's just what you have to endure as a West Ham fan for most seasons, which again, why this one has been somewhat a refreshing sense of like breath of fresh air, basically. But no, so Simon, I'm interested to sort of see how, as you as like a non-West Ham fan, how do you kind of look on West Ham in this 06/07 season, and what would you kind of felt would have been justice as a somewhat neutral fan?
I mean, looking at it from the outside, obviously without knowing the ins and outs of the whole thing, which I don't think we ever will really know 100% the full story of what happened with this. There probably should have been a points deduction. Just generally, that's what I feel. Without Mascherano and Tevez, would you have stayed up anyway? And it's a question because, as you said, the season before was really good from a West Ham perspective. So could you have argued that they might have had enough anyway? But I think when I look at it, I mean, I can understand why Sheffield United to this day feel very aggrieved about the whole way that the thing went down. And but then again, I think it's one of those that it kind of got to its natural conclusion in the end, and Sheffield United probably should have done enough to stay up regardless. I
think that's the big thing that kind of West Ham fans sort of like hold on to, because there was a point where they were, at least even with like 3-4 games to go, it was completely in their hands, and I think they just had to get a result against Wigan on the final day of the season. So yeah, it's one of them, really, isn't it? That, as I said, I can kind of see both sides, but at the same time, you kind of felt even without the points deduction and the Tevez kind of thing, you kind of think if they'd have just won on the last day, we wouldn't be talking about this, basically, or maybe not in the same way.
It's also like that last game of the season, because we had United, and that's obviously like, you think that's going to be a game that you're not going to get anything from, but to the extent United had already won the league, it was a game that potentially is easier than it would ever be, because they're on relaxed, they're on easy, maybe rest a few players, they don't need to go for it as much. Yeah. So even in that regard, it's almost like the stars aligned in the end, like to kind of get that over the line, as you say, because you say Sheffield United need to get a result against Wigan, well, you need to go away to Old Trafford and get something.
Well, I remember, and I think, Daniel, you did a really good, you showcased this in the book really well, that Neil Warnock, after those sets of fixtures, basically slammed Fergie for not starting Cristiano Ronaldo, and was it Scholes they didn't start as well?
Scholes, and I want to say Giggs from the top of my head. I think it might have been Giggs. Yeah, and it's a little bit of a myth the kind of weakened team, which I sort of pick apart in the book a little bit. It was a stronger team than they picked in a lot of games when they hadn't won the league. And the second half of that game was still, I think their front five was like Rooney, Solskjaer, Ronaldo, Scholes and Giggs. So like,
not bad.
It wasn't like we were playing a dog and duck pub 11 on the last day to try it. Or like I think I make a joke, you know, like a United team under Ferguson was never an easy game, especially because they'd won the league really easily. I'm not sure that ever makes it an easy game. So like it wasn't like they picked Paul Scholes in goal that day or anything. So, you know, like,
he'd have probably still dictated that game from the goal anyway.
Probably, probably.
Well, he'd be like Edison.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good point.
But yeah, no, it's as I said, it's such an interesting case, an interesting season that I just don't think other kind of say Great Escapes really kind of have, at least not again that off field controversy. But of course, as well, on top of that, and again, I really like the insight into. We also had the ownership change hands. Then the Icelandic bankers come in, and then all of a sudden, for the next couple of years or so before the Golden Sullivan era, we then start splashing this unsustainable amount of money on players because in the same sort of fashion that Roman Abramovich had done under Chelsea, but obviously to a lot better success. But we went for players like I know we signed a few good players for like Lucas Neal did well for us, and like Matthew Upson came in and was with us for a few years. But we went and got players like Kieran Dyer, who was just good player on when he was fit. But I think he played about 8 games for us all in or so over the course of 3 years on.
Never did 90. Never played 90 minutes. Never, not once.
Yeah, and on 100k a week as well, which that's a lot of money for for someone on the club now. Never mind 2008, 9, and again, I really kind of like the insight because again, being so young and as Matt kind of alluded to earlier, you certainly don't have to be a West Ham fan to enjoy the book because there's so much of a personal sense in it as well. But I really liked the covering of the ownership as well, and how we almost saw, in the same way that David Sullivan and Gold get criticised for the things they say in public, the Icelandic bankers almost beat them to it, but because social media was a thing then, a lot of that must have, either went under the carpet or got forgotten about, because until reading the book, I had no idea that the owners were coming out and, even just giving their comments on Pardew, Kirbishley at the time, which it's such a strange way or strange method to take as an owner, I would think.
Yeah, I think had Twitter been invented, I think Magnuson would have been prolific. I mean, he was even doing interviews for like fan sites, which I guess you partly could say, it's great that he's kind of that invested in it, but owners weren't doing that. I think he was trying too hard to please everybody. And in the end, obviously, didn't really succeed at pleasing anybody. But I think had it been, again, pre-social media, but had social media been about, I think they'd have been a much kind of more controversial duo, I think, at the time.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, especially when you look at, say, what, for a long, long time, our transfer news was broken by Jack Sullivan on Twitter. And and as you said, you kind of like that the owners would be doing interviews with, sort of like fan websites to a certain degree, because there's a level of interaction there, and fans might feel that their voices can be more easily heard to a certain degree, But on the flip side of that, I don't want to say when slagging certain names or something off, but there's got to be a level of professionalism there if you're going to do those things, in the same way that when like David Sullivan openly criticised who was it Jose Font and
Snodgrass
publicly, and you kind of go, hang on, that they were still players for us at the time. You can't there's got to be an element of
professionalism,
control,
so go on.
So it's one of those things that it's a really hard line for owners to be. They need to be visible to a degree, because a lot of times I'd tell from Ipswich, like Marcus Evans is criticised for not doing enough, not speaking out when times are tough, when fans just want to hear something from the owner. There is times when they need to do that, but it's a really fine line between doing that to a degree that the fans are happy, to then not doing it so much that you're just constantly giving updates that are criticising people, and it's a really tricky one for owners. I do have some sympathy for that.
Yeah, I think the first sort of 3 months or so, Magnussen was basically almost an unpaid columnist for most national newspapers. He was providing so many updates, particularly through that January. It was unbelievable the amount when you actually looked, when I was looking for my research, how much he was talking about like, other teams' players. So I think maybe obviously it wasn't a long-term ownership in the end because obviously the credit crunch and financial crisis, which turned the 40th most wealthy man in the world into a bankrupt overnight. Because that would happen, wouldn't it, to every club? But I think maybe had it been long term, they'd have kind of stepped back from it a little bit. But there was certainly kind of a level of excitement, I think you could say, from when they bought the club early on.
Definitely, because as I said, the kind of money that was being thrown on, players like Freddie Ljungberg came in, and then you kind of think again, it was exactly what had kind of happened with Chelsea, obviously, a few years earlier, and you kind of think, where could we be in 5 years' time if they're going to repeatedly throw all this cash and bring in some good players? And obviously, we saw again a couple of years later with the investment into Manchester City. But I did want to ask you, so obviously going back and doing all the research into this season, obviously knowing all the results now, it all finished, obviously, what sort of incidents stood out to you that kind of like raised your eyebrows somewhat, that made you kind of think, oh bloody hell, that did happen, or I can't believe that that was normal back then, that probably wouldn't happen nowadays?
Good question. A couple of things. I remember the Pardew and Wenger pushing and shoving on a touchline, which, because Pardew lost his job not long after, I don't think it's really remembered. But I can't remember many other times where managers have legitimately kind of squared up to each other on the touchline. It never really got the play that it maybe deserved. I think that was one. I'd almost forgot it had happened until I started kind of researching it. There's some bad and worse memories, I guess. Like losing 6-0 at Reading was a bad day. Yeah. That was a bad day. Particularly when at that point, pretty much half my friendship group were Reading fans off the back of going to university in Portsmouth. A lot of people from Berkshire at that point were going to university in Portsmouth. So that was a fun few days. Probably the other thing that it's not kind of irrelevant nowadays, but when I was doing my research with regards to like the run at the end that kept us up, I kind of forgot how strong the teams we had to play were. Like in the last 9 games, we literally play 5 of the top 6. Like you kind of forget that because United's famous and we won at Arsenal, but we had to play Everton and Bolton, and they came 5th and 6th that year. Obviously, Bolton now, that seems like a long way away from it. But when you factor that in...
A Kocher era kind of Bolton. There were constantly up there. Davis, Nolan.
Yeah, Allardyce literally left I think the week before we played them, and he took over at Newcastle for a brief spell the following year. But it was actually struck me just how hard that run-in was. To win 7 out of 9, which we did have to do to start, was hard enough. But when you actually factor in that 5 of those games are against the top 6, really is unbelievable. I think that you do that.
It's one of them that kind of just makes the sort of Great Escape so much. Again, it just projects it up there for me. Like when you think of, say, some of the other ones, like obviously mentioned West Brom, but even again, sort of like looking over, like we thought about like even like Wigan in 2012, because they ultimately they were part of they were part of what derailed Manchester United's title.
I remember that
year.
In a bit
more. I remember that
game.
Sean Maloney scored an absolute belter. I really remember that game. I don't know why that game really sticks in my head, because I think it was that game, and then they went straight into the Everton game, which they then drew, which was kind of the big decider in the title race as well. So it's I think
that's one of the that's one of the great things about any. Yeah, I think it's one of the great things about any relegation escape is you always get like sort of more random names pop up to score goals.
Well, one that Simon's always had a real liking to because of his roots is Connor Wickham, the year that Sunderland did their Great Escape in 2014, because those goals he scored for Sunderland to keep them up. I think they beat Man City like 1-0, and I think Man City went on and won the title
and he scored
year.
in that game.
Yeah. Because
he got Player of the Month as well, I think, for April. It's the only thing he did in the Premier League, really. But that for me was what Connor Wickham could have been had he not had all the injuries. That was kind of the Connor Wickham
terrible
team
injuries,
at Ipswich.
Yeah.
So obviously I saw him when it's like 17-year-old at Ipswich, and he looked a hell of a player. And then the move to Sunderland probably wasn't the right move, but eventually got in the team, and then he got a big move to Palace off the back of it, and then got injured basically straight away. And thinking maybe it's going to start turning, but no.
Yeah.
But I think, as you say, it's interesting. Like some of the names that pop up when you look at the kind of great escapes that you just look through, and you're like, I kind of forgot they even existed, but they had that one brief moment in the sun where they were the player that everyone's talking about for kind of 2 or 3 weeks.
I remember Pedro Mendes for Portsmouth when they had a sort of similar thing the year before our one, and he just kept scoring 30-yarders. And he was a perfectly good midfielder. Obviously, had a career at Tottenham and stuff, but then Portsmouth, from a pretty dire situation the year before, stayed up under Redknapp. And I think a game against Man City just scored the same goal twice, like this 30-yard dipping volley. And it's like, where are these players getting this from? Things like that.
It's so weird. And even then, I know obviously Tevez went on to have a fantastic career, winning the league with Man United and Champions League with Man United, as well as then, league titles with City and Juventus and that. But even for us, it played well for us throughout the course of the season. And he was rightfully our player of the year looking back then. But even that, he didn't score until the Spurs game. And by that point, we kind of thought, oh, great goal, but, a bit too little, too late kind of thing. And then went on this incredible... He only scored about 7 goals all in for us.
7 goals,
They were all in those last, 8-9 fixtures or so. And, it's kind of crazy how, as I say, even though he'd kind of played well for us at points, and especially, the whole Mascherano being dropped for Mullins thing was a very famous thing.
I've always felt sorry for Mullins because of that. Because he was a really good, again, perfectly good Premier League player, had a great career, at West Ham and I think Portsmouth he went on to, and played in the top level for a long time. But he's always remembered as this punchline because they left Mascherano out for him. I think it's really hard, unfair for him, because he was perfectly allowed to try and get in the team still. So.
And to be fair, I don't think Mascherano maybe got a fair crack at the whip, but Mullins was playing well for us. He was probably one of the few bright lights in that team at that point. And we were still losing every game, so it was one of them. It was one of those weird ones, really, wasn't it?
Mascherano, I think, only ever played 6 or 7 games at West Ham.
Yeah, very.
It's really, really funny, and then I touch on it in the book with some quotes later on in his life for saying how hard he found it at West Ham. And I thought this guy ended up playing for Barcelona with Messi. Probably looked around thinking, it's a lot easier here than it was at West Ham. It's brilliant.
And it's a fact that they could play a 5 foot, 8 guy centre half as well at Barcelona. That's how easy it was. So.
It's just a weird footnote in Mascherano and Tevez's history. It's like you look like playing for these brilliant South American sides, and then Liverpool, and obviously
winning everything at club football, basically.
Winning everything, and then it's just this weird 6-7 month footnote, or whatever
6
it is.
months at West Ham for Mascherano.
It's just weird.
When he retired, Mascherano, I remember he did on his social media, he did a big thing about a picture of him of every club that he played for, and he put us in it. And I thought, I don't think I'd put us in it if I was him. And also I thought, where did you find the picture, man? I can't believe he's got many.
No.
But,
Well, I don't think I don't think he played under Kirbishley at all, did he? Once Kirbishley
No,
came in?
not once.
No.
No.
Yeah, which that's kind of crazy, really. You would have thought that, new manager comes in, you'd have thought that he would have at least tried a few different players, especially in a team that hadn't been playing well. And for him to not play at all, I know, again, he then moved away in the January. Kirbishley came in the December, so it's not like they were there together more than a month or so. But that's still, again, when you think of all the hype and the build-up around the signing, for him to not even give him a try, that's kind
mad,
of bananas, really.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree. Also, it wasn't like when Kirbishley came in, we went on this great run of form. We won the first game against Man United fantastically.
Yeah.
We literally didn't win for 3 months after that. So, it wasn't like he'd stumbled across a formula that was working. you know.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's just one of the. It's again such a weird time, and there are certain, there's so many courses, especially over the last decade or so, that you can kind of go, that's so West Ham, and we've had some bad seasons for sure, but that season in particular, you kind of, even with what's come since and some stuff before, as a season as a whole, you kind of have to sit there and go, that is the most West Ham season that I can think of ever, really.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's for me, I think, from, like I said, from reading back into it, I've seen terrible seasons with West Ham, and I think the thing that stood out to me is it's not like, we were unlucky, we lost by a goal. There are lots of games where quite often we were just being demolished, 4-0, 6-0. 3-0, 4-0, like just consistently week after week, just losing.
We weren't kind of like
we weren't
Fulham.
Unlucky.
Yeah, we weren't kind of like Fulham this season where we just couldn't get over the line. We were
exactly
like starting the book. I kind of did, not so much the Spurs game, because I kind of thought, that leads to us getting better eventually. But I kind of thought, oh man, I'm gonna have to get to that Reading game where we lose 6-0 at some point, and
yeah, no, it's a good point. Yeah, it wasn't even like there were many games we were walking off thinking, we were unlucky. We were just getting beat regularly, which makes, again, what happened at the end in terms of turning it around even more unlikely, because it wasn't even like something you could say, that had been coming. If Fulham stay up this year, I think most people could say, I could see that coming. They just needed to start scoring some goals. Yeah. If Brighton win the league, I think we could see it coming, because I think they're one good striker away from probably getting the Champions League.
Their XG is ridiculous.
It's incredible. Yeah, like the ways they're finding to beat themselves is absolutely unbelievable. But we'd shown no sign of any sort of upturn, and then all of a sudden couldn't stop winning. It was absolutely ridiculous.
It's just absolutely bananas, really. I can't think of another season similar to that, not just in West Ham in terms of the Premier League as a whole. It's the circumstances and everything like that we just sort of overcame to somehow get over the line. Do you
think there was almost like a siege mentality created because you were feeling maybe hard done by that the Premier League's coming down hard on you over this transfer, so the club maybe becomes more insular and together?
Possibly. I think it maybe galvanised Tevez particularly, and it made, I think, the club, the fans particularly, who'd already taken to him, even more kind of protective over him. I'm not sure how much of it was. I think a lot of it, to be fair, was we actually finally found a team that was settled, with a couple of the more important players we'd brought in, like Lucas Neal, staying fit. But I think in terms of the crowd, it definitely made Tevez, who was already loved, kind of really like one of our own as such, kind of with the amount that was being written about him. So I think that did help. But I think partly was that we did find a team that was playing well regularly and was kind of stuck together. We didn't really get many injuries in the last run as well, which was a big thing.
I mean, it's interesting you talk about Tevez, because obviously, notoriously, he's someone that really cannot speak next to no English at all, which is a little... It's kind of frightening when you think that when did he leave Man City? 2013, 14, something like that?
He was here for years.
Yeah, he was here for the best part of a decade, and he still, barely speaks any English today. But I kind of love the details in the book, which, again, I had no idea about going into the book, of him trying to bond with the teammates by them going on a night out together, but he's brought a translator along to stand with him in the club so that he can
it's I can't even imagine how that would look.
No.
Like for someone up to come and buy him a drink, and he has to then talk to someone else who then has to reply for him.
I think I can't hear anything in a nightclub, so you just got like scream, and then he's got to scream it at you. So
I can just see like the image of Bielsa's translator just screaming at Anton Ferdinand in the middle of a nightclub and then screaming back at Carlos Tevez the other way.
Well, because I've seen, when I do press conferences, I've seen Bielsa's translator have to have a rant at a journalist via his translator. That was a bizarre experience because it was when the whole Spygate thing happened and they were playing Derby in the playoffs, and one of our journalists cheekily went, do you need to do any more scouting on Derby? And so the translator has to translate this question to him. You could see the anger like flickering. And he just goes on this tirade via his translator. He has to then translate all this shit back to the journalist.
That must be such an awkward job.
Yeah, it was surreal as well.
The thing that I love about the Bielsa translations in the interviews is when he'll natter on for about the best part of a minute or so, and then his translator will go, "We played well," and that's or something like that, or something along those like a one sentence thing, and then that's it. But yeah, as I say, it's one of those things that kind of really, even after he's left, and despite the fact that, as I said, he didn't speak good English, I do kind of have to respect Carlos Tevez for trying to become like one of the boys. Like there must have been a point for him at somewhere along in that season where he's gone, "I'm not going to be here next year." Like he might, whether it was around Christmas or there must have been a point in that season where he knew, "I'm not going to be here next year," but to still give it 100%, like week in, week out, and to still.
I do think that was kind of the character of Tevez though throughout his career. It was always, apart from that whole incident at City, obviously when he refused to play.
I
think 6 months come on as a sub, but he always had that. It's that Argentinian kind of fighting spirit, didn't he? I think.
Yeah, and I mean that celebration from that free kick for his first goal is just wild, and I think that just
and the celebration at Old Trafford, I remember, was ballistic. On the way end.
I remember I was actually sat not too far. I was in the bit where he jumped into, but I was further up the stand.
Yeah,
and I remember when he was thinking, he needs to stop, or he's going to jump. He has jumped in. Yeah, like it was.
He knew what he was doing.
Yeah, but like you sort of thought he's going a bit quick here. I think I was joking in the book. He probably should have been sent off. He committed about 6 different bookable offences in celebrating that goal. Like the shirt went, he jumped in the crowd. I think it's funny. But Simon, you said earlier about kind of how important he was, and would we have stayed up without him? His record for the club is like 27 games, 7 goals.
Yeah,
it's just that they all came in one rush at the end. But if it had been like 2 in September, 1 in October, whatever, no one I think would really talk about it in the way it is. The amount of people I see that put him in our best ever team, and we've had some good strikers. I mean, we've had some terrible ones. Don't get me wrong. Some terrible ones, but his goal record's nothing to write home about for us. If you just looked at the pure stats, you'd think he had a bad year there. How did he end up at United? But it is amazing, really, kind of how fondly it's remembered. I'm not saying wrongly, because he'd probably be near my best ever team as well. But if you just look at the stats of it, it is amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I think you are in terms. If you're going on the overall quality of the player, I mean, I want to say maybe not his overall time at West Ham, but even before the goals came, like the performances were there. It wasn't one of them where you were kind of looking at, say, like a Janssen or a Soldado for Spurs that you kind of looked at and you thought, fucking hell, like what on earth are these players doing? He was at least still playing well for us, and if anything was going to come, it was going to come through Tevez. It was just a case of that first goal, for whatever reason, eluded us. Even going as far back to the UEFA Cup then qualifiers, where he almost scored in his very first game, and had he scored, who kind of knows the form that he might have had throughout the whole season.
Couldn't agree more.
But yeah, so for that first goal to come against Spurs, right towards the end of the season, then go on that run. As I said, it'd be at that point the goals had finally started to match the performances that probably warranted a decent goals to game ratio that we'd kind of badly missed up to that point. When you think of how long we'd gone without scoring a goal at certain points.
It's one of those things where it's almost a collective dip in form. I mean, as a striker, when you're not getting supplied enough chances or kind of the whole team around you's not scoring, you think you've got to carry everybody. That weight of expectation makes it really, really difficult for a player, particularly, and everyone then starts talking about, oh, he's not scored, and that kind of just perpetuates. And strikers, everyone knows, if you can get a striker that's confident, they may not be good players, but if you can get them confident, I mean, you look at players like, say, Michu at Swansea, get them confident scoring goals, they can go on ridiculous runs.
Massively.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, Dan, bringing it up to kind of contemporary standards, where do you think we'll finish in this league this season? It's a big question. It's a difficult one. I can't answer it.
I would still be absolutely delighted if we could come 7th. I'd love to finish higher, but I'd just love to see us in the Europa League. I know, like, people say, it's too soon, the extra games, whatever. Like, me and my eldest were talking the other day, and he said, "I'd just like to see us in a draw." I'd like to see us in a group. Like, and I thought, it's kind of a little bit of a bugbear of mine how many people in football as well kind of don't want to play extra games. Like, the entire point though is to win, and by winning you then play games. And it would probably, if we came 7th and qualify for the Europa League, it probably would mean we'd finish a bit lower next year. But we've finished low quite a lot of years, so I'll be okay if that's also tied in for the European run.
I think, to be honest with you as well, like, despite how brilliant we have been this season as well, it's one of them where I think regardless of what happens next year, we'll probably finish somewhat lower anyway, because all of the I mean, Liverpool, I know City have looked like the peak City again, but Liverpool have so badly dropped off. You've got to kind of think they're not going to do that next year. You kind of think that Chelsea are going to have
Chelsea are sorting themselves out as well.
Yeah, exactly. You've got all these teams that you kind of think that, as good as we have been, there's also been, maybe not to the sort of degree there was when Leicester won the league, obviously, but there has been a sort of dip in form in the bigger teams as well. But even...
I mean, it's also, you've got to think this is a weird season in terms of COVID and empty stadiums and all of that stuff as well, which obviously, I know it impacts all clubs equally, but you kind of can't look at the results of this season and go, this is going to carry on forever. Liverpool with fans back at Anfield, Chelsea with fans back at Stamford Bridge, they might start turning it around. Fans make a big difference to all teams. But
I agree.
Yeah.
So I think it would be a shame if we didn't make the most of this opportunity this year. And I think it's been, as a West Ham fan, it's been such a good year that to come 9th at the end of it would feel a shame. And it'd be tough to remember in later years why it was so good. So my sort of thinking is, I hope we do come where we come as high up as possible, not just because I'm a West Ham fan, but I actually feel like the group of players deserve it.
Yeah. No,
is there a concern that this group's going to be split up in the summer, kind of Declan Rice, Souček?
I don't think so. I've worried about it. I was talking about it yesterday with my boys, and I think we've been good enough. Even if it's held off at the end, I think we'd get one more year out of Rice now. I think he's captain. He clearly is really invested in what we're doing. I think, quite honestly, Lampard leaving Chelsea helped in that sense.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think Man City will come calling for him at some point. I don't know if that'll be this year, though. I would guess we'd probably get one more year out of him, just off, even if we were to come 8th and miss out. And I think Souček, I can't see him kind of agitating for a move. I don't know the man, but he just seems like the nicest man in the world. It just doesn't really seem like his character.
Yeah, he does. It's a bit of a funny one, really, because
I'm just kind of thinking back to that season you finished 5th at Upton Park, and obviously Payet, that whole issue's there. So
I just don't see any of the players that might leave behaving the way that he did, or Arnautovic after as well.
I think what we've got, and again, like I might end up regretting saying this, but I think what we've got is something what we haven't had in a long time is players that just want to be at West Ham.
Yeah.
I don't mind. I know what West Ham are. We're not going to promise you Champions League football every year. We're not going to promise you Champions League football ever. So I appreciate that players come to us and maybe think, well, if I perform, I might move on to a City or a United or, one of those big, quote unquote, big clubs. And I completely get that and I respect that. But I think what we've got at the moment is a bunch of players that are enjoying playing football and like playing for West Ham. And
I agree.
If they perform, they'll move on. And I agree. I don't think we'll have the same. I can't see Souček reacting how Payet did.
No, exactly. I think the mentality at the club.
What you got is good characters.
Yeah.
I think define it.
I think the mentality of the club is probably the best I can ever remember it because even though Lingard's been here on loan 5 minutes, but even at the weekend he's posting a picture with him and his daughter on his back, both wearing West Ham shirts, and I'm like, you're only here on loan, man. Like you don't have to. You don't have to do these things. So I think it kind of shows where the whole team is at. I think all the team get on well, and I think the players, at least for the minute, they want to be playing for West Ham. They've clearly bought into what the manager wants to achieve, and it's one of those things as well because I really do look at the league right now, and I do kind of think that for me, second and third spots, they're not nailed on. I think anyone from sort of say, like Everton or so upwards, and maybe even to a lesser extent, if they can go on a bit of a run, even Spurs should be aiming for Champions League because it's been apart from City becoming good again, it's been one of the weirdest seasons ever. And Man United, I think, are too reliant on Bruno Fernandes, and I would also say that Leicester, they've got all these injury issues and they fell away last season. So I would even look at second and third spot and say any teams, from sort of say Spurs upwards should not think that an automatic Champions League spot is beyond them at this point because it's just so tight and the table is constantly changing with these games seemingly every day. But it's one of those, like, my big fear. I mean, it would be absolutely amazing if we finished fourth. I don't think we'd probably ever. I don't want to say don't ever see it again, but you really wouldn't know as a West Ham fan when that would ever come round again. But my big fear would be if we finished fourth and then just did the whole Astragugu thing in the qualifiers for the Champions League. Didn't make the group stage. That would be. I'd rather have just finished fifth than to do that.
If I'm standing in the London Stadium this season, next season, and I hear that Champions League, I think I might cry. It's just so unbelievable.
There's no think about it for me. I'm gone.
I don't know. Well, I guess do you have a season ticket for the London Stadium? And I guess will you be coming back?
I don't at the moment. I took a couple of years off just for finance. Obviously, you're living 100 miles away.
Of course.
That's a bit of a commute every other week, isn't it?
Just a little bit.
Yeah, but my youngest would want to go as well now, so I'd have to find money for 3 tickets. So it would. But we've gone. Well, my poor boy, my youngest son, his first ever game at London Stadium was the Burnley game.
Oh no!
Yeah, so he would have been 6 or 7 at the time, and that was the first game. That was a Christmas present. I got him that for Christmas.
Oh my god! No.
We had to leave after 70 minutes because people were rioting just below us, and people are running. He said he didn't want to go again, but he's softened his stance over the last couple of years. Yeah, if I ever do another book, I think I'll put that in it. To be fair,
it's memorable.
Jesus, no, that is beyond.
If he ever writes a book, he's got a hell of a starting point.
That is a beyond the baptism of fire. I couldn't imagine a worse way to get to for your first ever game, the excitement, the build up, and then just to have that. I feel like I kind of had the opposite as a kid. I started out with a 3-0 win over Sunderland, and then my first 3 years as a season ticket holder, we went to the Millennium Stadium 3 years in a row. 2 playoff finals. I know, 2 playoff finals, 1 FA Cup final, and I remember at the end of that FA Cup final, or even going up to that FA Cup final, my dad saying to me, "Don't get used to this." Because it's and I remember me being 10 at the time. I was like, I'll behave, Dad. I was like, we're going to be here again next year. It didn't pan out that way.
He knew.
Yeah. But I was going to say, so how do you because obviously having, I don't want to say like, you know, like young children, they're not like young, but how do your children, when you tell them about the Great Escape season, and obviously I presume they've read the book as well, how do they kind of find, is that kind of like a world they can't imagine? Because again, growing up, you know, you kind of, as you said, you kind of forget without social media how, even though it doesn't feel like it was that long ago, though it's coming up for, you know, like 14, 15 years ago
15
now.
years, yeah.
Like how did they kind of perceive that season?
Yeah, I think it's kind of more bewilderment a little bit of kind of how we did it. And yeah, like I said earlier, it is a weird thing that it kind of feels quite recent. Like a lot of it looks the way it looks now in terms of football, but there are so many differences. Like my kids always kind of laugh at me when I say that, you know, like when I finished university, Facebook hadn't been invented, which, yeah, I'm only 36, but it makes me feel like to them like I'm about 60. So, so I think there's that any kind of pre-social media era now, I think for anybody like of their generation is forever ago. But like, you know, like I was
gonna say it's a bit like when your mum and dad say, "Oh, I remember when there wasn't coloured telly" or something like that.
exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if either of them have read it. I've given both a copy, but I think they probably just scan it and look for their names in it, and I think that's probably as much as they'll ever do, to be fair. But
fair enough.
Yeah.
No, well, I'm sure that they'll have a, you know, if they've not read it yet, they'll have to have a read of it in a fair few years, because it is a very, very good story, and a fantastic insight into a crazy season of West Ham United's history. I mean, I don't know if you guys have got anything you want to add at all, Matt, Simon?
No.
No, not for me.
No,
thank you so much for coming on, Daniel.
No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, yeah, well, there's the book, The Greatest Escape. It's available now. The craziest season in West Ham United's history. We'll put like an Amazon link in the description and everything like that as well. But yeah, as I said, you know, I just saw it. You know, I think I saw you on Twitter before. That looks interesting, and having so much nostalgia for that season, I was like, I'll give this a read, and I was like, oh, it's just, I just thought it was a really good insight. I think just a perfect balance of kind of factual game statistics and information, that kind of thing, but then also a great personal element that opens itself up for more than just West Ham fans at that point. And
no, I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you very much, George. It's nice to say.
But it's been brilliant. It's been brilliant to have you on, and we'll look forward for anything else you do in the future, Daniel. Thank you very much. This is us signing out. Have a great. Thank you for watching. We'll see you on the next one. That's the final whistle. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mid-Table and Up podcast. If you enjoy our top 10 lists, please make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Let us know what you would have done differently. If you watch this episode on YouTube, make sure to put your foot through that subscribe button and leave a like on the video, as well as follow us on Spotify, the podcast app, to keep up to date with the series. Thank you very much. See you next time.